What happens when Leandria Johnson, the Grammy-winning voice that moved millions, stands up at 42 years old and declares, "I can't stay silent anymore" about Pastor Creflo Dollar? The gospel world stops in its tracks. This isn't just another celebrity drama. This is a story about power, faith, money, and the courage it takes to challenge one of the most influential megachurch pastors in America. What Leandria revealed shocked everyone who thought they knew the gospel industry. And the implications? They're still reverberating through churches across the nation. Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will change how you see the intersection of fame, faith, and fortune forever. Before we dive into the controversy, you need to understand who Leandria Johnson really is. Born in 1983 in Palatka, Florida, Leandria grew up immersed in the church. Her father was a pastor. Gospel music was the soundtrack of her childhood. By the time she was a teenager, it was clear she possessed a gift that transcended the ordinary. But Leandria's path to stardom wasn't the fairy tale you might expect. In 2010, everything transformed. She auditioned for BET's gospel singing competition, Sunday Best, in its third season. When she opened her mouth to sing, jaws dropped. Her voice carried something raw, something authentic, something that couldn't be manufactured or coached. It was the kind of anointing that made believers shout and skeptics reconsider. She won that competition, and suddenly Leandria Johnson wasn't just a church singer anymore. She was a star. Her debut album, The Awakening of Leandria Johnson, didn't just do well, it dominated. It reached #1 on the Billboard Gospel Albums chart. In 2012, she won a Grammy Award for Best Gospel Contemporary Christian Music Performance for her song, Jesus. A Grammy. Let that sink in. But here's what made Leandria different from other gospel artists. She never pretended to be perfect. While other gospel singers carefully curated squeaky clean images, Leandria was refreshingly, sometimes controversially, human. She spoke openly about her struggles, her past, her failures. She'd been through divorce. She'd battled personal demons, and she wasn't interested in hiding behind a religious mask. This authenticity made her beloved by millions who saw themselves in her story. But it also made her vulnerable in an industry that often values image over truth. Now, let's talk about the man at the center of the storm, Pastor Creflo Dollar. If you're not familiar with Creflo Dollar, understand this. He's not just any pastor. He's the founder of World Changers Church International in College Park, Georgia, a megachurch with over 30,000 members. He's a televangelist whose programs reach millions worldwide, and he's one of the most prominent voices in what's called prosperity gospel theology. The prosperity gospel teaches that financial blessing and physical well-being are always the will of God for believers, and that faith, positive speech, and donations to religious causes will increase one's material wealth. It's a theology that's made Creflo Dollar incredibly wealthy and equally controversial. Dollar lives in a multi-million-dollar mansion, has owned private jets, and his ministry has generated hundreds of millions of dollars over the decades. His supporters see him as a man of God blessing others with biblical principles of abundance. His critics see him as someone who's enriched himself by exploiting vulnerable believers. He's been investigated, criticized, and defended with equal passion. But through it all, Creflo Dollar has maintained his position as one of the most powerful figures in American Christianity. So when Leandria Johnson, with her platform and her credibility, decided to speak out about him, people listened. So what exactly did Leandria Johnson say that caused such an uproar? In various social media posts and statements that gained viral traction, Leandria began speaking candidly about her experiences in the gospel industry, and specifically about influential megachurch pastors and their practices. While her comments evolved over time and across different platforms, the core message was consistent and explosive. Leandria spoke about the exploitation she witnessed and experienced. She talked about how gospel artists, despite their talent and the revenue they generate, are often treated as expendable. She discussed how some churches and pastors would bring in talented singers, use their gifts to pack pews and boost offerings, but never properly compensate them or support them beyond their usefulness. More specifically regarding Creflo Dollar's ministry, Leandria addressed what she described as financial manipulation and the problematic nature of prosperity gospel theology. She questioned how pastors could live in extraordinary luxury while many of their congregants struggled financially. She challenged the teaching that suggests God's favor is directly tied to material wealth. But perhaps most courageously, Leandria spoke about the culture of silence in the gospel industry. She described an unspoken rule: don't criticize the big names, don't question the powerful pastors, don't expose what happens behind the scenes, because if you do, you'll be blacklisted. You'll lose opportunities. You'll be labeled as divisive, rebellious, or worse, touching God's anointed. I can't stay silent anymore, she declared. And with those words, she broke that code of silence. She spoke about feeling used, about watching others being used, and about a system that prioritizes profit over people. She questioned why so many gospel singers end up broken, struggling, and abandoned by the same industry that made millions off their voices. Leandria didn't just make vague allegations. She spoke with the specificity of someone who had been there, who had seen the machinery up close, who understood how the prosperity gospel industrial complex really works. The response to Leandria's revelations was swift and divided. On one side, thousands of people rallied behind her. Former church members, other gospel artists who'd experienced similar treatment, and critics of prosperity gospel theology all expressed support. Social media exploded with people sharing their own stories of financial manipulation in churches, of pastors living lavishly while their congregations struggled, of talented artists being exploited and discarded. Many saw Leandria as a truth teller, someone finally willing to say what others had been thinking for years. They praised her courage and called for more accountability in megachurch ministries. But the backlash was equally fierce. Supporters of Creflo Dollar and prosperity gospel theology pushed back hard. Some accused Leandria of jealousy, bitterness, or trying to gain attention. Others invoked the biblical concept of touching God's anointed, suggesting that criticizing a pastor was spiritually dangerous. Some pointed to Leandria's own past struggles and controversies as reasons to dismiss her claims. Creflo Dollar's ministry itself issued carefully worded responses that emphasized their commitment to biblical principles and their track record of blessing people's lives. They neither directly addressed every specific claim nor acknowledged wrongdoing, a common strategy for large ministries facing criticism. What's fascinating is that this controversy highlighted a generational and theological divide within Black church communities. Older, more traditional believers tended to defend Dollar and criticize Leandria for speaking out publicly. Younger believers, often more skeptical of prosperity gospel and megachurch culture, largely supported her. The gospel industry itself became quieter than usual. Many artists and church leaders who privately agreed with Leandria wouldn't speak publicly, proving her very point about the culture of silence and fear of retaliation. Now, let's separate emotion from fact. What do we actually know? First, the prosperity gospel controversy is real and well documented. Numerous investigations by journalists, researchers, and even governmental bodies have raised serious questions about the financial practices of some prosperity gospel ministries. The lack of financial transparency, the lavish lifestyles of some pastors, and the psychological manipulation of vulnerable believers are documented issues, not just allegations. Regarding Creflo Dollar specifically, his ministry has faced scrutiny multiple times. In 2015, his request for donations to purchase a $65 million private jet sparked national outrage and debate, while he eventually acquired a jet through different means. The incident crystallized concerns about prosperity gospel excesses. Leandria Johnson's personal struggles are also factual. She's been open about battles with alcohol, relationship difficulties, and mental health challenges. But here's what's important. Her imperfections don't automatically invalidate her observations about systemic issues. In fact, someone who's experienced brokenness might be uniquely qualified to identify systems that break people. The exploitation of gospel artists is a documented phenomenon. Many gospel singers have spoken about being underpaid or not paid at all for performances, being expected to perform for exposure rather than compensation, and facing financial hardship despite their contributions to profitable ministries. What we can't do is verify every specific interaction between Leandria and Creflo Dollar's ministry without access to private conversations and contracts. But we can acknowledge that her broader critiques align with patterns that others have documented and experienced. The truth is complex. Creflo Dollar has undoubtedly helped some people. His ministry has provided community, inspiration, and support to thousands. At the same time, legitimate questions about prosperity gospel theology, financial transparency, and the treatment of artists in the gospel industry deserve serious consideration. So what's really going on here? Why does this matter beyond just gospel industry gossip? This controversy reveals something fundamental about power dynamics in religious spaces. When faith, fame, and fortune intersect, the potential for exploitation increases dramatically, and those with the least power, often the artists and ordinary believers, are most vulnerable. The prosperity gospel isn't just a theology, it's an economic system. It generates billions of dollars annually. For pastors at the top of this system, maintaining it requires controlling the narrative. This is why the culture of silence Leandria described is so powerful. If people speak out about exploitation or abuse, the whole structure becomes vulnerable to scrutiny. Leandria's willingness to speak despite personal cost represents a broader shift happening in religious communities. Younger generations are demanding accountability, transparency, and authenticity. They're less willing to accept "don't question the pastor" as a valid response to legitimate concerns. There's also a racial and cultural dimension worth acknowledging. The Black church has been historically central to African American communities, providing not just spiritual guidance but social support, political organization, and economic opportunity. The prosperity gospel emerged partly from this context, promising that Black people who'd been economically oppressed could experience God's abundance. But when that promise becomes a tool for enriching a few while many struggle, it betrays the very community it claims to serve. This is what makes the conversation so painful and necessary. What Leandria did was risky. In the gospel industry, speaking out against powerful figures can effectively end your career. Doors close, opportunities disappear, and your reputation gets systematically damaged. The fact that she spoke anyway suggests something important. She reached a point where her integrity mattered more than her career preservation. This is the anatomy of courage, not the absence of fear, but the decision that some truths are too important to keep silent about regardless of personal cost. Beyond this controversy, we can't forget what Leandria Johnson has accomplished. She's a Grammy Award winner who's touched millions with her voice. Her music has provided comfort, inspiration, and hope to people going through their darkest moments. Songs like Jesus and Better have become anthems for believers navigating life's challenges. Her authenticity, even when controversial, has given permission to others to be real about their struggles. In a religious culture that often demands performative perfection, Leandria's willingness to be publicly imperfect has been revolutionary. She's also demonstrated resilience. Despite personal challenges, career obstacles, and now this controversy, she continues creating, performing, and connecting with audiences who see themselves in her journey. Whether you agree with how she's handled everything or not, you have to respect her unwillingness to be silenced or controlled. So what should we take away from this? First, we should learn that questioning isn't the same as attacking. Asking for accountability from religious leaders isn't an act of rebellion. It's an act of faithfulness to higher principles. The greatest spiritual traditions have always emphasized truth over comfortable falsehoods. Second, we should recognize that systems that demand silence are usually protecting something that can't withstand scrutiny. Healthy institutions welcome questions because they have nothing to hide. It's the corrupt or flawed systems that require enforced silence to survive. Third, we need to acknowledge the humanity of everyone involved. Creflo Dollar is a human being who likely believes he's serving God. Leandria Johnson is a human being with flaws and gifts in equal measure. The people in the congregations are human beings seeking meaning and connection. No one in this story is a pure villain or a perfect hero. But that doesn't mean we can't identify behaviors, systems, and theologies that cause harm. Fourth, we should consider how financial incentives shape religious messaging. When a theology directly benefits those teaching it financially, we should examine it with extra care. This doesn't automatically make it false, but it does require scrutiny. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, we should celebrate those who speak truth at personal cost. Whether or not you agree with every word Leandria Johnson has said, the fact that she was willing to speak at all, knowing the potential consequences, is significant. The gospel music industry, like all industries, needs people willing to challenge the status quo. It needs artists who remember that their first calling is to truth, not to career advancement or institutional loyalty. At 42 years old, Leandria Johnson decided that she'd rather be authentic than comfortable, rather be honest than protected. She chose her conscience over her career security. That's not just a gospel industry story. That's a human story we can all learn from. The question this controversy leaves us with isn't who was right, Leandria or Creflo. The question is, what kind of religious communities do we want to be part of? Ones where power protects itself through silence, or ones where truth matters more than comfort? Leandria Johnson forced us to confront that question. How we answer it will shape the future of faith communities for generations to come. Whatever happens next in this ongoing story, one thing is clear: the conversation has started, and it's not going away. The era of unquestioned religious authority is ending, and perhaps, just perhaps, that's exactly what genuine faith requires.